अगर ये ट्रेड on that one. And then
financial and personal data and information when, DOJ has access to this information. I'm hearing from my constituents as well about the potential shuttering of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. As Senator Warnock mentioned, CFPB has returned over $21 billion to millions of consumers, and that's a real impact. But I want to also highlight that it was your leadership in the Fed working with Congress and the Biden administration to really help answer that question that you were asked about if you had the choice to switch countries with France and Germany and others, that you said no, you'd rather be here. And that success is a testament to all of us. We came together during a really tough economic time at the end of this, during a pandemic, and it limited the recession and job losses. And since COVID, we've seen a robust job growth. But we also have grappled with inflation that drove prices up for so many goods. And I've worked to address one part of this phenomenon, our supply chain disruptions. In fact, I recently joined Senators Cantwell and Blackburn to reintroduce the bipartisan Promoting Resilient Supply Chains Act to address supply chain vulnerabilities. And while we see indications that inflation may be slowing, too many of our constituents are still facing high prices and economic uncertainty. We need to do everything that we can to address this anxiety and the realities that Americans are facing. And there seems to be a disconnect. While the economy is doing, well here, on the ground, people aren't really feeling that. So, Mr. Powell, can you talk about, from your perspective, just what is driving this disconnect between traditional economic indicators, such as GDP growth and the stock market performance, and the tangible benefits for families?
I'd be glad to. So it is clear that the overall aggregate numbers are just very, very good for the economy. 4% unemployment, inflation down to 2.6% last year, and the economy growing well in excess of 2%. These are good numbers. But what people are feeling is the results of several years of inflation, and particularly for people in the low and moderate income category, they're really feeling it. So if you look at the earnings releases and press conferences that they do, that companies like the dollar stores and things like that do, who deal a lot with low and moderate income people, they're all telling you that those consumers are feeling really strapped. So we do understand that, and we try to keep that in mind. Even though we acknowledge that the overall data are good, we see what people are feeling, and that's inflation. So it's just another reminder how much people hate inflation and how bad inflation is for people, high inflation, and it just furthers our resolve to get inflation back to 2% and keep it there.
Thank you. One of the big areas that I focus on, you've heard many of us across the aisle talk about the housing crisis that we have in this country. And I know a few others have asked questions previous to me about this, but I would love to follow up afterwards with specifically what you think are the short-term and long-term things that we can do to really address the housing supply and affordability crisis. I have reducing regulatory barriers, zoning reform, these things that we know we can, in partnership with local governments, make a significant difference. And so if I could, would love, again, to follow up with you, even cutting red tape, those kinds of things that we can do long-term and short-term. But I did want to mention one last thing in the 20 seconds that I have. The Fed listens, things that you do, activities that you do. Could you talk a little bit about that as well? Because working people, a lot of times people don't feel that they have a place in these kind of conversations, but can you talk about what the Fed does with Fed Listens?
So briefly, we did this as part of our review 5 years ago, and we do it on an ongoing basis now. And the idea is that we break out from the usual people that we talk to, which is a pretty diverse group, and try to deal directly with people who are experiencing the economy and our policies. And it's quite eye-opening to listen to people talk about it. We had one person at the Chicago conference 5 years ago who said the expansion, which was then 9 years old, is just reaching my community. And he talked for some minutes about how companies were going into prisons and finding people who weren't going to get out for a year or two and training them and stuff like that. You could hear a pin drop. It was very telling stuff. So I think we learned from all that. And so we'll keep doing it.
Well, I will end by saying, there's a famous quote, I think it's Martin Luther King, we may have come over on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. We need to get it together. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Blunt Rochester. Senator Marino.
Chairman, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time on the phone the other day. Appreciate that very much. Just to ask you a broad general question. When you increase M2, the money supply, by 40% over a short period of time, is that going to drive inflation?
It could. Well, I think we discussed, monetary aggregates have not been a great predictor of really any other thing. But I think when there's a sharp increase like that in M2, then that could, that's something that might cause some inflation.
Now, is that just to be clear for the people watching, that happened because of public policy in this institution here, correct? In other words, there wasn't a civilian-led effort to increase government spending outside of the elected leaders that chose to make those decisions.
So I think that was part of it. I think there were just a lot of causes in the inflation that we saw, but it's fiscal policy, it was monetary policy, it was just closing and reopening the economy. It just generated a bunch of confusing signals and then a lot of inflation everywhere in the world, really, whether people did a lot of fiscal policy or not. So, but there were many factors, and that's, I would say, one of them.
But just to be clear, it wasn't the citizens of the country making those decisions. Those are elected leaders choosing to close the economy. Businesses didn't decide one day to close, didn't decide to not be able to go to work. Those were decisions made by policymakers, correct?
Yes.
So it's a little disingenuous to be hear my colleagues talk about how they care so much about inflation when in reality they cause it. But I don't want to continue that. I'd ask you a question just out of curiosity, because you worked at the Department of Treasury. At what point did you think they were going to run out of ink? Did that concern you, that maybe it was possible that they were printing so much money that the Treasury would have to find alternate ink suppliers?
Didn't occur to me, but good question.
So along those lines, something that concerns me a lot is the idea that we would even look like China in any way. So can I have your commitment that as long as you're the chairman of the Federal Reserve System, that we will never have a central bank digital currency?
Yes.
Thank you for that. I think that's extremely important. It makes me very happy to hear you say that. Shifting gears to a little bit, something that matters to me and entrepreneurs all over the country is, why can't I wire somebody money at 6 p.m. Eastern time? Can we get to a 24/7 scenario where wires are cleared every day, all day? I think that would be very, very helpful to businesses all over the country.
So that's coming. It's just coming slowly here. We have that at FedNow. We'll get in touch with you about FedNow. We provide that service between two banks, and others want to provide it too. But yes, we do kind of lag a lot of other countries in that, and it is time for that to happen.
So I know I don't want to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, FedNow, I was very familiar with it, but it was a little bit late in coming. Can we get a commitment to do that this year, so that by the end of this calendar year, businesses can transact 24/7 and settle payments?
Well, I think they can do that now I believe they can do it now on FedNow, and they can also do it on the RTP system as well. So I think it's available. Let me check in and I'll follow up with you.
That'd be great. One other piece of the puzzle here is, what do you think the Fed can do to fight international terror groups, for example, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the proxies? Kids that are my kids' age, being held for almost 500 days. The Qataris are obviously completely complicit in all this. What can we do? What advice would you have that we can do to make certain that we bring these terror groups to their knees?
You know, we do enforce the money laundering laws very, very strictly, and but it's a tough question. You know, it's a huge focus in international meetings and things like that. But you're right; it's really hard to nail it down, particularly if it's all happening overseas. But we can do what we can do with our banks. We don't want to make it so costly, though, that they debank people because they're so worried about violating the money laundering laws. I mean, that's some of what's happening, according to the banks, is that they're so afraid that there might be money laundering that they just cut people off at the first flag, as opposed to perfectly legal businesses are being, thrown out because of their fear of being caught doing money laundering. So I think there's a balance there, but no, it's a really, really hard project and one we spend a lot of time on.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moreno. The patient and persistent Senator Kim.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure some of my colleagues had a chance to be able to run off to some of their meetings, and I've enjoyed being able to listen to the chairman, to be able to hear some of your articulation here. I just want to share with you, I did a telephone town hall last night, and I'm glad to hear some of my other colleagues as well. And there is a lot of anxiety right now by the American people in trying to understand what's happening and seeing and interpreting what's happening on the news. I guess I just wanted to ask you, if you were, for your words of how you would explain to the American people the importance of independence when it comes to the Federal Reserve.
So I think the point is that we'll make better policy, we'll keep inflation lower if we just focus on doing our job and stay out of politics, stay out of elections, don't try to favor or to hurt any political party, any political figure, just focus on the data. If we start putting up political filters, we'll be no good, we'll be less effective at our already quite difficult job. And I do think that's broadly understood. I think there's broad support up here in both political parties and on both sides of the Hill. I think that there is a decent degree of support for continued independence. That's not to say we shouldn't be accountable. We should be very accountable and transparent about what we do. We should be up here explaining what we do and why to our oversight body, which is this committee and then the same committee on the House side. So that's what I would say.
Making decisions about your core mission about stability and about growth, but not thinking about it in terms of the context of an election cycle, for instance. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
I wanted to just shift gears a little bit, but similar type topic. There's been a lot of attention to the role of public servants within our government and, our understanding what roles they play, how many to have. And I guess I just wanted to ask if you could speak to the role of the Federal Reserve employees, their qualifications, and
अगर आपके फोन में मल्टीपल 4, मल्टीपल 7, मल्टीपल 8 आ रहे हैं, मैं मान ही नहीं सकता आप लाइफ के अंदर प्रॉब्लम.
more importantly, like their importance to the mission and be able to engage. How important are they to the work that you are trying to do towards stability and growth?
Kind of out of the blue, and economies all over the world are shutting down. The U.S. Treasury market is stopping to function. Commercial paper. Economists are writing about a depression. People at the Fed who went through the global financial crisis 10 years before step forward and say, we got this, we know what to do. Here's what we do with the Treasury market. Here's what we do with money market funds. Here's what we do with the companies that can't get any financing. The markets were closed and companies were having maturing debt that they had to roll over. The people who knew what to do in that pretty dire emergency were working at the Federal Reserve and other places. But I will tell you, it was impressive. And I think if you could have seen the way people react and how hard they work and how much they know and how well it worked, really. Our work during the acute phase of the crisis was very successful. And it's entirely due to the knowledge base that resides with career people at the Fed.
Yeah. Would you say that the Fed is overstaffed?
No, I would say that, overworked, maybe not overstaffed. everybody at the Fed works really hard. It's a place where people work.
And a lot of
very
this
hard.
conversation right now about staffing numbers at different departments and agencies, it's going back to this sense of the taxpayer dollar, in terms of accountability there. But I guess I just want to ask you, is the Fed paid for by the taxpayer dollars? Can you explain to us what the burden is on the taxpayer?
So we're self-funding through our large balance sheet.
So when it comes to the staffing at the Federal Reserve, not coming from the taxpayers, is that right?
Indirectly, we give away all of our profits. We give back to Treasury, and those profits would be higher if we didn't pay for the Fed. So in fairness, it's ultimately paid for by the taxpayer. But in that sense, we're self-funded.
Self-funded.
Yeah.
Just one last question here. You talked about the different actors that are involved when it comes to levying tariffs in terms of paying that, the exporter, the importer, the consumer. You said middlemen could be part of that. I guess I just wanted to ask you, do you know of any way in which to 100% guarantee that the consumers will not have to pay higher costs when it comes to tariffs?
Not really. It's not going to be easy to identify with any accuracy exactly where costs do fall, but I think it'd be hard to guarantee any particular outcome. I think we're just going to have to see.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Warren, did you?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a point before we quit here, and that is about law enforcement. If you keep the laws the same on the books, but you fire the cops, you're going to have a lot more crime. That's kind of law enforcement 101. And the problem we've got right now is law in the books about consumer protection hasn't changed. But the cops, at least right at this moment, have been told at CFPB to stand down. And I appreciate that we have state AGs who step in, and often they partner up with the CFPB. But there is no one else for the giant banks who actually does what's called the bank examination, the supervision. And that is so important. Remember the Wells Fargo scandal, where Wells Fargo was illegally opening fake accounts in people's names? You find that through bank examination, not because the person who got cheated could figure it out. Bank of America gets hauled in because bank examiners discovered they were charging people illegally on junk fees. Nobody finds that but the people who are down in the banks doing the bank examination on behalf of the consumers. Look, we tried a patchwork of law enforcement for consumers before 2008. We had all those laws scattered among 7 different agencies, and we saw how it ended. It ended with millions of people losing their homes, millions of people losing their jobs, millions of people losing their savings. The CFPB is our law enforcement agency to make sure that the giant banks follow the rules on consumer protection. And for me, right now, I'd be really worried about doing business with a giant bank when there's no cop on the beat.
Thank you, Senator. I will recognize myself for just one question, and it'll even be relevant to your job, I promise, Mr. Chairman. So thank you for your patience and for being here. I wanted to follow up on there were some questions, or at least I know Senator Rounds asked a Basel III question, and your response was basically, let's get the people in place from the administration, and then we'll proceed again. Treasury Secretary Besson recently said that the banking system is, I believe, said, quote, well-capitalized, perhaps over-capitalized, unquote. And given that assessment, or if you agree with it, could you discuss the necessity of advancing a new Basel III proposal, specifically how an updated regulation would impact the ability of the regional banks to compete with the big Wall Street banks? And what considerations should be taken into account to ensure that we have a competitive banking system? Because I know there's this concern comes and goes, and for those of us who have largely regional banks, or God love them, the best of all, community banks and credit unions, a competitive system is really important. So if you could just answer that, and then I'll wrap up.
Sure. So we're eager to get together with new colleagues from the FDIC, new leadership at the FDIC and the OCC, to try to finish Basel III. My own view has been that our banks are well capitalized, and Basel III was not supposed to be an exercise in raising capital in U.S. banks. Mario Draghi said that. Dan Tarullo said that back in the day. I believe. So I think that's about right. We have some work to do, but we'll get there, I believe, fairly quickly. In terms of your regionals, they don't face the GSIB surcharges. They don't face quite the burden that the large banks face on resolution planning and that sort of thing. So we need those banks to be healthy and profitable because we need them to compete with the GSIBs. We don't want a world where the GSIBs just keep getting a bigger and bigger share of the economy. That's not what we're looking for, and that's what a lot of pressure. We've seen the number of community banks, especially, declining for 30 years.
Yes.
And this is not something we want to. We don't want to be the cause of that. If it's happening by natural causes or because of evolving tech.
तू जो ये गूगल शीट यूज करता रहता है पूरा दिन, तुझे पता है कितना टाइम वेस्ट होता है गूगल शीट में? अगर तू
Technology, that's one thing, but we don't want to be inadvertently causing that to happen.
So as you look at a Basel III exercise, can you think of anything specifically that ensures that competitive, diverse banking system is maintained rather than a consolidation, whether it's fewer community banks into more regional banks or fewer regional banks into more Wall Street banks?
Well, I just think you think twice before you impose the kinds of things that we impose on the largest banks and the next to largest banks. You want to be careful not to just think we should do exactly the same thing. It's what tends to happen is, so for smaller banks, it raises the fixed costs is what it does of banking, and it makes it harder to start new banks and makes it harder for any but the largest to be successful. So that's not what we want. We want a lot of competition, and these regionals. It's important that they thrive.
I agree, and I agree with your assessment. So thank you for that. Thank you for staying with us for the day, and glad we could get you first. So as we wrap up, for senators who wish to submit questions for the hearing record, those questions are due 1 week from today, Tuesday, February 18th. Chair Powell, you have 45 days from that day to submit your response to questions for the record. Thank you. The committee stands adjourned.
Thank you.
You pressure a bank to cut off services to digital asset firms, political figures, and conservative aligned businesses and individuals. To me, that goes against the principles of fairness and market access. Over the last 2 years, as the ranking member of this committee, I have consistently argued that Basel III endgame proposal will raise costs and limit credit access for hardworking Americans. And while I'm glad this proposal was not finalized, the uncertainty surrounding Basel III forced banks to put capital on the sidelines, limiting access to that capital for local small businesses across our country. Now, as chairman, I plan to work to rectify the issues of the Biden administration. Chairman Powell, I look forward to hearing from you on the Federal Reserve's future and the plans that you have for right-sizing the financial regulatory framework, specifically around Basel III. To create jobs here in America, we need to make sure there's capital and liquidity in the market. And we also want all Americans, even those growing up in poverty like I did, to know that they can access the capital necessary to start new businesses, grow existing businesses, buy a home, and pursue their American dream. Chairman, I look forward to your comments and your testimony. I will simply say that I believe that weaponizing an independent agency like the Fed for liberal positions, from debanking crypto, bank stress test, and the green financing scheme, is not calling balls and strikes as a fair referee. And I hope that we are getting ready to clean that slate, start afresh, and focus on a healthy economy. Ranking Member Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair Powell, it is no secret that you and I disagree on the need for strong bank regulation, on monetary policy, and on the Fed's stock trading scheme.
आप आंधे हो क्यों बाहर निकलते हो आपके माँ बाप ने क्यों बाहर निकाला क्या करेंगे आप निकल के आपको
Chaos of President Trump and his co-president Elon Musk. From on-again, off-again tariffs to on-again, off-again layoffs for tens of thousands of government workers, to on-again, off-again cuts in domestic grain purchases, to on-again, off-again support for medical research. Now, Co-President Musk and his OMB director have frozen all work at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There are now 0 cops overseeing the $18 trillion consumer lending market. 0 cops. Investigations into illegal foreclosures and auto repossessions canceled. Exams of giant credit card issuers to weed out unlawful junk fees canceled. Probes of illegal debt collection practices canceled. Rules to save people billions of dollars canceled. If Musk and his OMB director succeed in killing the CFPB, it's like putting a sign on every checking account, every credit card, every mortgage application, and every car loan. Cops have been fired. Let the scams begin. That is not all. Musk and his Doge crew are also rooting through the Treasury's most important payment systems, the financial plumbing that ensures that billions of payments go through, from Social Security checks to grants for community health centers. No one has verified how they got this access or what they are doing with it. No one has checked whether Americans' financial data has been copied or sold for the personal profit of Mr. Musk. Instead, we've had a series of misleading and conflicting statements by Treasury Secretary Bessent. After receiving public blowback, it appears that Secretary Bessent is now trying to throw the Federal Reserve under the bus. Secretary Bessent claims that Doge can't meddle with the Treasury's payment systems because ultimately the Fed is in control. Now, I'm not sure whether Secretary Bessent doesn't understand how the system works or if he's just trying to shift the blame to you. But I know he is wrong. The Fed simply executes the transactions that Treasury instructs. If Elon and his hackers, for example, initiate instructions to choke off payments to their enemies, or if they issue instructions to shut down payment for teachers' aides for kids with special needs, the Fed may have no way of knowing that the instructions were manipulated, and the Fed may have no legal method to override them. Chair Powell, the next 18 months may define your legacy and the country's trust in the Fed as an institution. I expect that you will work with Democrats and Republicans in Congress if Doge's next move is to try to commandeer the Fed's payment system. I also expect that you will not join the conspiracy to shutter the CFPB. Unlike the Treasury payment instructions, you can see if the CFPB's funding requests have been manipulated. I understand that some extremists have a different view about what the law ought to be, but under the law right now, impoundment is clearly illegal. Do not make the Federal Reserve an accomplice to this illegal act and forever sully the reputation of the Fed. Keep the CFPB funded exactly as the law requires. We are in the middle of a crisis as Elon Musk tries to take over our government. But let's also talk for just a minute about your day-to-day job, meeting the Fed's dual mandate of promoting maximum employment and stable prices. It's now clear that the Fed acted too late and let inflation get too high, and then responded by keeping rates too high for too long. These policies made the big drivers of inflation, like housing costs, even worse. And they put Americans' jobs at risk, making it more difficult for them to afford a home and for small businesses to be able to finance their operations. I urge you to move more rapidly to bring down interest rates, beginning with a meaningful rate cut next month. You have proven you can move quickly when it is politically expedient. After President Trump was elected, within the space of just a few weeks, you scrubbed seemingly all mention of diversity and inclusion from the Fed's website. You withdrew from an international central bank group that shares information on climate-related risks to the financial system. You instituted a hiring freeze that will limit the number of cops on the Wall Street beat, and you announced plans to gut big bank stress tests. I can see the immediate political appeal of your strategy, but ultimately it will fail. You will lose good people. Climate catastrophes will continue to mount, and the increasing vulnerability of big banks will threaten our entire economy. Sure, Donald Trump may be happier with you right now, but wading deeper into politics to please him over the long run will burn the reputation and the independence of the Fed and put our entire economy at risk. I urge you, don't fall into these traps. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am. Today we'll hear from Chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, on the semi-annual monetary policy report to Congress. Chair Powell, thank you for your testimony today, and you are now recognized.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Warren, and other members of the committee, our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. The economy is strong overall and has made significant progress toward our goals over the past 2 years. Labor market conditions have cooled from their formerly overheated state and remain solid. Inflation has moved much closer to our 2% longer run goal, though it remains somewhat elevated. We are attentive to the risks on both sides of our mandate. I will review the current economic situation before turning to monetary policy. Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a solid pace. GDP rose 2.5% in 2024, bolstered by
Traders never ever use stop loss. जी हाँ, आपने बिल्कुल सही सुना, and let me tell you why you should listen to me.
By resilient consumer spending. Investment in equipment and intangibles appears to have declined in the fourth quarter, but was solid for the year overall. Following weakness in the middle of last year, activity in the housing sector seems to have stabilized. In the labor market, conditions remain solid and appear to have stabilized. Payroll job gains averaged 189,000 per month over the past 4 months. Following earlier increases, the unemployment rate has been steady now since the middle of last year, and at 4% in January remains low. Nominal wage growth has eased over the past year, and the jobs to workers gap has narrowed. Overall, a wide set of indicators suggests that conditions in the labor market are broadly in balance. The labor market is not a source of significant inflationary pressures. The strong labor market conditions in recent years have helped narrow long-standing disparities in employment and earnings across demographic groups. Inflation has eased significantly over the past 2 years, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer-term goal. PCE prices rose 2.6% over the 12 months ending in December, and excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.8%. Longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. Since last September, the FOMC lowered the policy rate by a full percentage point from its peak, after having maintained the target range for the federal funds rate at 5.25% to 5.5% for 14 months. That recalibration of our policy stance was appropriate in light of the progress on inflation and the cooling in the labor market. Meanwhile, we've continued to reduce our securities holdings. With our policy stance now significantly less restrictive than it had been, and the economy remaining strong, we do not need to be in a hurry to adjust our policy stance. We know that reducing policy restraint too fast or too much could hinder progress on inflation. At the same time, reducing policy restraint too slowly or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment. In considering the extent and timing of additional adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the FOMC will assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We can maintain policy.
Objection. The chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. This hearing is titled The Federal Reserve Semi-Annual Monetary Policy Report. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. I will note that at the outset that this hearing has a hard stop at 1 p.m., which we will strictly observe. I'll now recognize myself for 4 minutes for an opening statement. Welcome, Chairman Powell. Thank you for being with us today. For the last 4 years, inflation has crushed Americans. Today, it takes $1.21 to purchase what just cost $1 in January of 2021, as measured by the Consumer Price Index. The erosion of Americans' incomes and thereby their savings was caused by a combination of irresponsible fiscal policy, supply chain disruptions, but also by, in my view, the Federal Reserve fighting the last war, staying too low for too long. Chairman Powell, you and I have discussed that previous hearings of the Fed, like many others, assumed that the pre-pandemic era of low inflation and low interest rates would continue. This belief was one of the reasons the Fed changed its monetary policy framework in August 2020, only 7 months before inflation began its 4-decade steep march upward in March of 2021. In hindsight, the adoption of the so-called flexible average inflation targeting appears ill-timed and ill-fitted for a post-pandemic world. As the Fed undertakes a review of its monetary policy framework, you must account for the lessons of the last 4 years and think about what's ahead over the horizon, not what has been. The Fed has made progress on inflation, but as the last mile seems the hardest. As Bank of America economist Stephen Juneau said yesterday, inflation is stuck above target with risks to the upside. In August 2022, with inflation raging, you gave a speech that echoed some of your predecessors as chair. You vowed to keep at it till we're confident the job is done. It's a vow you should fulfill. With this morning's confirmation that inflation is well above the 2% target at 3%, and making move upwards, other economic indicators are positive. As you reported yesterday, a low inflation rate, solid GDP growth, and financial conditions continue to support expansion and investment. This is not a time to say that there are no risks, but some perhaps unseen. However, these risks in comparison to the risk of a resurgence of inflation are modest. Given the already high prices due to President Biden's inflation, Americans simply cannot afford further price increases at the grocery store and gas pump. Such a resurgence would likely force the Fed to begin another tightening cycle, making mortgages, credit cards, and small business loans unattainable for many. That's why I urge the Fed to forge ahead with its monetary policy duties until you're confident the mission is complete and price stability has been restored. The fact is, over the past decade, we witnessed too many distracting additional mandates, diluting the Fed's core mission of price stability. This is the reason we formed the Task Force on Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity that will be led by Chair Frank Lucas. The task force purpose is to ensure that the monetary policy actions of the Fed are put under a magnifying glass and prioritized for this committee. And I look forward to our first hearing of the task force. I now want to turn to some of the other Fed responsibilities: bank regulation and supervision. The Fed was created by Congress to be an independent agency. The intent is to insulate the Federal Reserve's monetary policy from political influence. Unfortunately, in the last 2.5 years of the Biden administration, the Fed took on serious liberties with its independence in the areas of supervision. In law, Federal Vice Chair for Supervision is to develop policy recommendations that then are been brought to the Board of Governors for consideration. In my estimation, over the years, you and the Board have been too deferential to the statutory Vice Chairman for Supervision.
आपके पैसे ले गया मेरे पैसे
नंबर बोल उसका 999 888 बस 10 नंबर हो गया।
अगर आपके मोबाइल नंबर में 222 या 888 आते हैं तो आपकी लाइफ के इम्बैलेंसेस इतने बढ़ जाएंगे कि मेंटल हेल्थ एकदम बेकार हो सकती है, क्योंकि इन कॉम्बिनेशन को न्यूमरोलॉजी में बैड एनर्जी और नेगेटिव एनर्जी का मसीहा माना गया है। और आप ऐसे नंबर्स का इम्पैक्ट अपनी लाइफ से रिमूव करना चाहते हैं तो आज ही सीखिए मेरी 2 दिन की मोबाइल न्यूमरोलॉजी की वर्कशॉप के अंदर। इस वर्कशॉप में आपको मिलेगा हमारा 5,000 रुपीज का मोबाइल।
Vice Chair Barr turned the Basel III endgame rulemaking into a partisan attempt to propose a massive hike on capital on American banks, making them less competitive. The Fed has a chance right now to get back on the right track and preserve its independence for the long-term benefit of the American people. And with that, I yield back. Chair recognizes Mr. Lucas, the Chair of the Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity Task Force, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While there are differences of approach in this room, a bipartisan guiding principle is that maximizing economic growth is the path to economic prosperity. It is the single greatest factor in delivering opportunity and improving the quality of life for the folks back home. The actions of the Federal Reserve and the machinery of monetary policy play an important role in economic stability. With the 5-year review of the monetary policy framework underway, I hope this will be an opportunity to evaluate the effectiveness of the Fed's toolkit and its vast influence on the lives of every American. The creation of the new monetary policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity Task Force will afford us the opportunity to dive deeper into this topic. Chairman Powell, thank you for being here. There are real issues that deserve our attention, and I hope today will be productive. I look forward to hearing your testimony on the state of the economy, where we're at, and where we're headed. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes Mr. Vargas, the ranking member of the Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity Task Force, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, ranking member. And thank you, Chairman Powell, both for your years of public service and for appearing before our committee today. As a ranking member of the newly formed Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity Task Force, I look forward to working with Chairman Lucas and the rest of my colleagues to address these important issues. The research is clear. Independent central banks perform better in carrying out their mandates than politically motivated central banks. The independence of the Federal Reserve is crucial to achievement of this dual mandate goals to maintain both maximum employment and stable prices. And although this dual mandate has been criticized by some, it continues to serve Americans well. It has not prevented the Fed from making substantial progress on driving down inflation, all the while avoiding a recession, which many saw as inevitable. I look forward to your testimony, Chairman Powell, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'd like to turn to the gentleman from Michigan and yield to him for a point of personal privilege. Mr. Heisinger.
Thank you, Chairman Hill. And as we all know, all good things must come to an end. And I want to take a minute to recognize someone who is leaving the committee, but has been an integral part of the oversight work Republicans have done over the last 5 years. Although Nicole Vo is all of 29 years old, something that we tease her about on a fairly regular basis, I quickly realized that despite her physical stature, she was a force to be reckoned with. Her dedication to my team, this committee, her colleagues, and this institution are something that we all should aspire to achieve. And Nicole has effectively served in various roles, from a professional staff member right out of law school to now Deputy General Counsel in this particular Congress. And her time with the committee, Nicole has worked on or led investigations into Sam Bankman-Fried, the bank collapses of 2023, terrorist financing, culture and corruption at the FDIC, and the SEC's climate disclosure rule, just to name a few. And I've sat through her questioning, and it's fierce and tenacious and directed. Myself, my team, and frankly, the whole Financial Services Committee team can't thank Nicole enough for her work and what she has done on behalf of this organization. And like all good staffers, she has become a confidant, a sounding board, has the ability to say no in a very nice way, but in a very tough way as well. And although Nicole will be leaving the committee, her contributions will not be forgotten and are deeply cherished. So thank you, Nicole. We deeply appreciate all your work, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, we welcome